Hello and welcome to the Midwest Motoring Podcast, sponsored by Hagerty. My name is Matt Pesiconis, your intrepid host, and I'm joined today by a very special guest. I've met him a couple times out and about in the Central Ohio area at different car shows, at different tracks. I'm joined by, he's a full-time educator at the Southwest City Schools. He is basically an alumni of the Save a Warrior group, or SAW for short. He is a soldier, was a soldier. He's just an all-around great guy in terms of he loves cars. He's using his hobbies as a way to teach people and reach out to communities, reach out to different individuals suffering with PTSD. I'm talking about Jeremy Clark of the Central Ohio area. Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Matt, for having me. I appreciate it.
Man, we talked about this, you and I personally, but you sent me over a brief on you that is literally 7 pages long, and it's not, you're not regurgitating anything. It's not like you're trying to fill stuff. It is all just amazing things that you have done in your life. And so I'm really thankful that you could join us because, you know, I wasn't a soldier, but I worked with a lot of people who were soldiers, and I think this is a really big part of our society that we're not doing a very good job of working with, which is, you know, soldiers coming back from work, struggling with PTSD and other issues, and how do we work with them? And I think a lot of what you are working with and the organizations that you work with not only reach out to soldiers, but I think that skill set also works with, like you said, or like you have found, full-time educating of children, right? Correct. So, I don't want to take up too much airtime, like beating around the bush. I really just want you to, like we talked about, I want you to knock it out of the park with just talking about how did you get here? How did we get to, the Jeremy Clark that I know now, and what kind of struggles did you go through to get there? So, why don't you take us back to the very beginning?
All right, sounds good. Well, I was born on a Monday. No, I'm just kidding.
I mean, if we want to go that far back, we can. Hold on, folks. It's going to be a very long podcast.
After high school, I realized I couldn't afford life, and I couldn't, I came from a very poor, and later to find out, what is called foreshadowing, traumatic childhood. And so I joined the military for my escape and also pay for a future college of some sort. So I decided to work consistently for about 5 years full-time in the military, and I decided to go ahead and get out at that point and just stay traditional because the military benefits offered me this great path into college at 100% paid tuition. So I jumped into college. I decided at some point what I wanted to do, and that was to become an educator, specifically in art education.
Right.
I did have an art background in high school. It wasn't a great one, but I always did enjoy it. So there was at least a good foundation for me to build off of with that part of.
Now, what branch of the military did you serve in?
I served with the United States Air Force.
Okay.
Actually, yep. And we are called airmen. So, but I did serve with the Army. I did serve with the Army for a full year, and I'll get into that in a minute. So, after I started teaching, I started taking deployments and going different places all around the world. Actually, if you happen to remember, I have these tattoos on my arm, and they're wrapped with 50 caliber machine guns or bullets, and all of the bullets are my deployments from my enlistment date to my retirement date on there.
Oh, wow.
And so I started first I went to Saudi Arabia in 99, then I went to Kuwait in 04, and then we ended up in Iraq. Iraq is where my whole life changed. With everything that happened there, because that's where I was serving with the Army. Served in Germany, Turkey, Guam, and then I finally retired out after 20 years in 1 month.
Wow.
So, yeah. What ended up happening was traditionally in the Air Force, a combat role is not usually in the cards. There are some specific combat roles for Air Force people, but typically the average Joe is not going to see it. Well, my job, I worked in transportation. I chose the career because I love cars. And so I got to learn to drive anything with wheels, from a forklift to a tractor trailer to specialized a 60K, which holds 60,000 pounds of equipment to load airplanes with.
Oh, dang.
Yeah, so I got to drive all this sorts of fun stuff. Well, that job translates to 88 Mike, which is in the Army, truck drivers. And I made a joke once that the Air Force general lost a hand at poker, and he bet 500 airmen, and he lost to the Army, and we sent 500 airmen to go backfill the Army.
Oh, wow.
And in Iraq. And when the time frame we went in was right after the capture of Saddam. So Saddam was captured in November, I believe. We were filling in January.
Oh, dang.
So after that, so the whole government was unstable. The military police were disbanded, and we were basically in charge of everything at that point. Well, that whole year, if you recall, a lot of the convoys, which is what I ended up doing convoy security.
Right.
My specific job was a 50 caliber machine gun operator, the Browning M2.
Mm-hmm.
Dad always told me, if you're going to fight with the biggest gun.
The Madus.
That's what I chose. Throughout 8.5 months while on the ground in Iraq, we traveled 15,431 miles and ran 121 missions, of course, over 223 days.
Wow.
My truck, personally, I kept tabs of stuff. Countless gunfights. I can't remember how many there were, but our truck either drove through, was hit, or experienced 14 roadside bombs along the way.
Wow.
So that's roadside bombs and suicide bombers in their cars. So the events of September 5th is where it changed my life, because one of my friends in particular, he was the truck in front of me. He was our lead truck. I was the rear truck. He clears the intersection and we would clear him, and he would go back to the front of the convoy. As we pulled beside each other, I remember looking over my shoulder at him and giving him a nod saying, hey, because he's one of my friends. He lives in Columbus. And as soon as I turned my head, I hear a big explosion. A suicide bomber detonated himself right there in the car next to him. As I turn back around, I just see explosions, debris hitting my car, my truck, and my friend Corey no longer in vision. He was hit. So when we rounded the wagons, I started posting for security, making sure no one was coming at us. They were attending to Corey, and the biggest helpless feeling ever was watching one of my great friends laying on the ground, bleeding out, and me not being able to do anything about it.
Right.
Provide security at that point. So that moment when that happened, I believe, was my moral injury, which changed everything, because that date, that anniversary date, the way I felt afterwards, all of that changed who I was prior. And so as time went on, I came home, started to try to return to life. And over the course of the next 6 years, I was struggling with a lot of things, not understanding why, ended up in a divorce, started having mental issues, struggling with anger and depression, just all these struggles. And all of it stemmed back to these moments, which I didn't realize later until I was processing them in the VA. And I found this great organization. They're called the Vet Center. It's a fantastic place created by veterans for veterans. And the best thing about it, it's completely free for any veteran that has their paperwork.
Oh, okay.
It's free counseling. It's free couple counseling, free family counseling, one-on-one.
That's huge.
Yeah, it's completely free. It's located right now in Columbus. And I fell in with a guy who was actually a former Marine, and this is one of the best things about it. He's a former Marine that's a licensed doctor in psychology, therapist. So what was great is, military member, we're used to speaking a certain way.
Right.
And talk to a civilian doctor, you don't hear that common vernacular,
right,
if you will. So when he sat down with me, he just basically told me point blank, look, this is your problem. And I didn't get that from the civilian doctor. So I started seeking help, getting better, doing counseling, going to group counseling, all this while still educating. But what happened was, like, for instance, some things I mentioned earlier was I was struggling with poor performance reviews because I wasn't, doing the things I was doing. I was having troubles with memory, learning new process skills. I know we talked about earlier, I have my master's degree. I did my master's degree in 1 year prior to the
crazy. That's so crazy.
And that's working full time too. I did my bachelor's and
wait a minute. You were working during that time as well? And you did all that in 1 year?
Yes.
Wow, Jeremy, that's super impressive.
Like I said, that was the old me, my brain before my injuries. Because I was teaching in Grove City, driving to Athens for my master's degree. Every Tuesday and
Dang.
Thursdays to do. So
Because
yeah, it was.
did you go to OU for that?
Yes.
Okay.
Hmm.
I knew that you
Yeah,
had we had a similar connection to OU. I didn't know why, but now it makes sense.
yeah, I did my bachelor's and my master's at OU.
Okay. I did my bachelor's there and graduated in 2010, if that says anything. I'm a youngin', folks. That's what that means. I find out that it's actually not that young anymore. Like I used to think like, oh yeah, 2010, I'm young. But now there's like people like, oh yeah, I graduated in 2020. I'm like, wow, wow. That's okay. I'm pretty old now. So I didn't want to detract us too much from that. And by the way, folks, I'll put Jeremy provided me with a bunch of links that if you know of anyone who is struggling with any of these conditions, or if you just want to reach out and offer help or go yourself, they'll be in our Facebook group. And then I'm going to have a couple of our other friends in the industry post them as well to some of their Facebook groups. So hopefully we can get some more awareness to this stuff as well as get some help, get help out to those who need it the most. So, Jeremy, back to what you were saying, man. So you got your master's in a year.
Yeah. So what ended up happening was I noticed a change in my life and I noticed things, but I didn't know why or what it was. And also being an Air Force guy that dealt with combat, my own supervisors when I came home didn't know really how to handle me. They didn't understand the change in mentality, the frustrations, or what PTSD later became known as. So when I was dealing with stuff, they would send me home. They would send me home without pay. They would write me up and they would do all these things because they thought it was just a behavior issue with me. But I found over time and started seeking help. That's when I started having discussions with them saying, hey, look, this is what I'm going to this place for. I'm being treated for this through the Veterans Administration, the Health Administration from them. And eventually the conversation started to change. And I believe that through my acknowledgement of it and education, sharing with my military leadership, it led to a complete change for the next guy.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
The next guy who was actually a friend of mine who came back with PTSD, where I was written up, he was talked to. When I was sent home without pay, they actually drove him to Wright-Patterson to get help.
Okay.
There was a big change that happened there. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I remember reading that in your little blurb about that, and I was like, I completely read that the wrong way. I thought, the behavioral issues were happening because of things like that, where you would be talking to and somebody else was, set and had a different experience altogether. But what you're saying is that your implementation and your assistance to these leaders in the Air Force was actually to help the next guy, and that's what ended up happening. Which that's incredible.
Yeah. So this whole conversation and the results of that, I didn't see it right then, but what happened was later when I processed it, because I kind of was angry at first because I was still dealing with it. But then I realized that what I shared and what I went through helped the next guy. And, military guys, teachers, we're always about service of others. Service before self is a classic motto in the military. And I realized that I could use my story in some way to help others. And that's what it grew into. And the method that I took to it was, why not combine my passion with that? So I started looking at my car. I started looking at different things I could do. And so one of the things I first started doing when I was trying to give back was I was doing I hosted some road rallies around Ohio where they were focused on charity-based ideas around cancer, specifically because my sister had breast cancer.
Okay.
And she's a survivor. So we raised a ton of money for the Stephanie Spielman. And and then I got to that point where I realized, okay, I have an avenue to do something here. Why not focus on what really matters to me? And that was the whole idea of PTSD awareness. So we started something the first year, this group of guys that I used to do a whole bunch of stuff with, and they were fantastic, supportive of it. We raised awareness. And over the course of the next year, I started talking about how can I take this one step further. And I started seeing the wraps on cars to become more and more popular among the community. And what ended up happening was I pulled out pictures of my car one day, I printed them off at work, and I'm sitting there just drawing on them and doodling. I say, what would I make my car look like if I could?
Right.
And by the way, for those that don't know, I have a 2005 Infiniti G35 coupe that I bought brand new right after I came home from Iraq. That's where I spent my money.
Okay.
And it was my gift of survival, as I call it. So, and working on that car and doing stuff with that car kind of just kept me sane in those moments of when I needed clarity. So
you've got a couple other cars. Sorry to interrupt. You've got a couple other cars too, and we'll get into that a bit later. But yes. Continue.
So I took that idea, I drew on the car, and I started reaching out to a couple places about, hey, would you be interested in doing something with ideas with this work of what I want to do? And I ended up meeting up with this gentleman named Eric Wolford. He owns Pro Graphics of Columbus. He was in the industry for about 15 years at this point when I met him. I saw his work, and we started talking, and I just said, hey, this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm struggling with, and this is what I want to do. And really, before I even finished talking, he says, I'm in. I'll do it. And he goes, my dad is a Marine veteran himself. And he goes, I've driven him to the VA plenty of times and seen firsthand what the idea of, the whole idea of freedom isn't free. I tell people this too. If you don't believe freedom isn't free, go sit in front of a VA, go volunteer at a VA hospital. You'll see what freedom costs to these veterans that walk in and out of there on it or roll in and out of there every day.
Right.
So he jumped on board, and over the course of, it was actually prepping for one of the Columbus International Auto Shows.
Okay.
I had a spot for my car on display there.
What year was this, by the way?
2014.
Okay.
Yeah, 2014 is when things started changing towards all this. So that was 2014, and I talked to them, and they said, well, put your car on display here. And I ended up right in front of the main doors is where the car was going to be.
I did see it there, I believe.
And what ended up happening was we had a week to get it done. And yeah.
Wow, a week?
A week. Sundays when we got word that it was going to happen, and we started on Wednesday that week. So we lost 3 days for him to do graphics,
right,
printing, that stuff. We started wrapping on Wednesday, and because I didn't want to interfere with his workflow, I said let's do it after work. And I volunteered to help, and I would go over there. Like, for instance, I cleaned my whole car down, acetoned it to clean off all wax, and then we started wrapping. And between Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday night, we worked. And then Saturday and Sunday, I had drill.
Wow.
So I
okay.
had work today, and then we'd go back and work on the car in the evening. We spent 22 hours wrapping that car.
Dang. Now, and we'll post some photos of it up on Facebook too, because this car, I mean, it's an awesome wrap. You guys did a fantastic job on it. I mean, honestly, and it really speaks to what your experience in the military was, plus a great billboard for those who need to get help. You know what I mean? I think it's awesome, which is what drew me to even searching you out, because I remember we have a shared connection in the insurance world. Chris Callan is your agent now, and right. Chris was telling me about this really cool G35 Infiniti that a guy put a lot of money into the wrap and a lot of effort into it, and then he's put some modifications for the track. Is that something Haggerty would do? And I'm like, why does this sound so familiar? And I go, hey, Chris, you got to send me a photo of this. And he sent it. I'm like, oh, okay, perfect. Now I have a name for the guy that has this car, because I really wanted to reach out to you about, just engaging, because, our role here in Central Ohio is to engage with the car community. And I think not only can we engage with you as a car fan, but also, people who are looking for help. And, we always want to reach out to the community too. So, so you guys got it wrapped for the show.
Right. We it was parked on Sunday. I drove the car with pieces off the car, and we reattached the pieces to the car on Sundays and Monday on the showroom floor. Wow. And then the show opened up on Wednesday with me wiping it down, cleaning it, and making sure it was good to go.
That sounds like the epitome of reality TV, especially for cars. It's like, I got to do this in 1 week, or else the school's not going to get their money. It's like this crazy drama that's just thrown into it for no reason, but it actually happened. You were finally bolted everything up, and then you were wiping it down. It's like, oh, it's clean, and then here come people, all the guests coming into the show. That's crazy.
It was an experience, definitely, but I was really glad that it happened, and I wouldn't have had it anyway, because Eric now is one of my really good friends. I actually committed, and he runs a dojo too, and that's where and it falls in line with my whole mentality process that I look for. So
What's the
I'm now
dojo?
the Butchikon Dojo. It's located off South Hamilton Road.
Okay,
Um,
cool.
Fantastic place. And so I'm one of his students now, but I helped him with several things also afterwards, to say, hey, thank you for this. I'll help you with this wrap, that wrap, moving. And our friendship just blossomed from there. We just became really good friends. Because of that, actually, my 87 Mazda RX-7 that you know about as well, it's LS swapped for the rest of the world that needs to know about it. It's I get a lot of love and hate for that car, but I love it because it's what I wanted always. And that car, Eric and I we're working on a design to promote Save a Warrior as well. And because it's an 87, it has some what technically it is track damage from on the car.
Okay.
And the fiberglass. My goal was to make this wrap instead of pretty like my Infinity. I want to make it look like a vintage. Hey, I just rolled this car out of a field, and now we're driving it on the street race car.
Okay.
Look. And
have some patina to it.
Yes, patina, weathered. Yeah,
battle damage, right?
That's right. Mm-hmm. So that's the whole goal with the RX-7. That's what we're hoping to do sometime here in the next few months, trying to figure out how we're going to do that and what the design's going to finalize. So.
Now, do you also have a 280Z or is it a 240?
It is a 240Z.
240, okay.
The 72, man, that's a whole story in itself. I can tell you a lifetime of stories about that one. That one, in 2014, I've been riding motorcycles that point up for 23 years, most of it daily in Ohio, year-round. I was the guy riding the BMW in the rain, snow, hurricanes, whatever. I was out there. I would put 15,000 miles a year or more on the bike.
That's crazy.
Yes.
When I had I think we talked about this a long time ago. When I had a sport bike, I would drive like 100 miles, and I'd be like, I feel like I just ran a marathon. I can't ride that bike anymore.
Yeah, well, it was part of, hey, I needed to do this, but also at the same time, I didn't understand at the time, but it was putting me in a place mentally that I was familiar with, which was fight or flight. And with PTSD, fight or flight is one of the symptoms of that. And since it was putting me in that place, it was a comfortable place, one place that I became very familiar with while in Iraq. That's why I think I grew addicted to riding the motorcycle so much, because it kept me in that place where life was simple.
Yeah.
And I understood everything.
Yeah.
Either A, I'm 5 or this guy's going to kill me. That was it. So I decided at some point that the PTSD was being aggravated by my motorcycle riding. So I decided to let the motorcycle go. And when I sold the bike, my wife was like, hey, you have cash? What are you going to do with that cash? I see you got a bunch of cash. I go, yeah, I know what I'm going to do with the cash. I'm buying the new car. She's like, what? I'm like, yeah, and I'm buying parts with the extra cash for the car. I started looking, and I found a 72 Datsun 240Z up in Cleveland, Ohio, of all places. I searched all over. I searched in Seattle, Arizona, tried to find one. Found one in Cleveland, Ohio, backyard. And I emailed the guy, and he emailed me back and forth. We talked a few times, 3 or 4 emails. And I said, do you want to just talk? It might be easier. And he goes, I'm weeding out potentials. I'm like, okay. Turns out, when I finally talked to him, this guy, he is the original owner of the car, and he bought it brand new when he became a NASA engineer up in Cleveland, and that was his gift to himself.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So he bought it brand new in 72, and there's a whole stories behind it. I got, like, for instance, I have Mr. K's autograph with a letter and a gold-plated mirror Datsun tag that came with it as a letter of apology to my friend Marty for not. They sold his car out from underneath him when he bought it. So,
oh man,
a whole bunch of fun stories there. So anyway, Marty ended up inviting me to his house, and after 3.5 hours of being interviewed, as I called it, he finally offered to sell me the car. And his goal was to find someone who was going to take the car and bring it back to life, but not chop it up.
Okay.
He didn't want something like that. And I told him a couple things. I said, Marty, I will take care of this car, because one of my good friends, George, he put this out saying, we don't own the car. We're just art curators. We're just curating it for the next person.
All right. That's a good way to put it.
I was like, that's respect. All right. So I said, Marty, I'm going to take care of this car for the next guy. And over the course of 2 years, the car had no brakes. It had no working fuel system, but was able to be driving with a can. I could put a can on the front and drive it up on a trailer. I let Marty drive it on the trailer. But I worked on it, suspension pieces here and there, and eventually got it running. And this was my supplemental to the motorcycle riding is what it was.
Okay.
So working in the garage, doing all this stuff, it was it changed the way I was processing. It changed the way that I was problem solving. It was changing the way that I was looking at issues. Instead of freaking out, throwing stuff, I was like, okay, I got to take a breath, walk away, and I'll come back tomorrow. And tomorrow I'll have a fresh mind. And usually what happened every time I did that, I walked back in and I could see the problems being solved instantly.
Right.
And I just, so,
some clarity kicked in.
Absolutely. So the Datsun, after I got it running and set up, I drove it for about 2 years daily, all as much as I could.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Loving it. I tell you what, if you've never driven the 240Z, the driving experience, the driving engagement, the driver feedback, that's unlike any car I've ever driven. Yeah. So I would choose to drive that car over any of my other cars any given day of the week. So after I got it all set up and running, on year 3, I felt comfortable enough to drive it back to Cleveland. And I never told Marty what I was doing. I called his wife because we still talk, we still email, I share updates, stories. We talk about this, we talk about that. I sent him Hot Wheel versions of the car, just to say, hey, I appreciate everything that he did for me.
You're killing him, is what's happening. He's every time you send him one of those cars, he's like, no, I let it go. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
No, well, here's what's funny is when I send him pictures, he would scour over them for details. One time I just sent him a picture. I didn't even add anything. And he emails me back, you waxed the car, didn't you? Because it's patina. And I'm like, you could tell? He goes, oh, I could tell. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how hard was he staring at the camera or the pictures? It blew my mind.
He had a magnifying glass, because he didn't, expand the image.
Right. Well, Marty's 74 years old right now.
Okay.
So, I mean, he's there. But I called Barb, his wife, and I said, hey, I want to bring the car up so Marty can see it. I'm going to drive it up there because I told him I'd bring it back one day. And I ended up driving up there, and it was a whole big experience for me, just getting in the car, driving it for 3 hours up to Cleveland, listening to see if anything was going on. Nothing's going on. I showed up at the house, and he walked out the front door because he heard a car, and he's just seen his face light up because I drove his car back to him.
Right.
I overlooked this part earlier, but the last time Marty drove the car on the street was 1983.
Holy moly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so he had it registered, but his wife was into boating, so the car got pushed to the side. And
right.
But 1983 was the last time it was registered, and so 30 years later, I ended up letting him drive the car on the street for the first time.
Wow.
And watching him, and he's a survivor of hip cancer, so he didn't have a good hip, but he was ecstatic and elated to drive the car. He went out there, and
he'd struggle through it, and just to get that experience again.
Absolutely. After him taking it easy for about maybe 10 seconds, all of a sudden you could see his mind shift, and he went right back into Marty mode driving this car, and he started laying into it just like he probably would have, back in the 70s.
Yeah.
It was a great experience.
That's awesome. Like, that's so cool that you resurrected his memories of that by fixing the car up, solving some problems with it, and maintaining it, like you said, as an art collector would do. Is yes, sometimes you need to fix it and repaint it, or blend the paints and bring the paints back to life, but at the same time it's still the car that Marty loved. That's cool.
Yes.
Which is an awesome looking car, by the way. So good job, Marty, picking out an awesome looking car.
Well, the second time out, that time I was up there, he shared with me more stories, like how he ran it in road rallies with his buddy who had a 911 in the 70s, an air-cooled.
Okay.
And that blew my mind. I'm like, are you telling me I have racing pedigree now in my car? He goes, oh, yeah. He pulled out paperwork, trophies. I'm like, no way. That's cool. But one of the things he shared with me, which is something now I'll never want to paint the car, was there's a dent on the driver's door. And he's walking around, he's feeling the car, and he goes, did I tell you what this dent is on the door? I'm like, no. He goes, my first date with Barb, I picked her up at her apartment. And when I parked the car, I came out, and he said, he used some foul language, but he was like, some American guy in a big Chevy truck didn't like the little Japanese car, and he slammed his door into Marty's door.
Oh, geez.
Dented it. And Barb looks at me. She's like, oh, my gosh, I didn't hear the end of that story forever. I'm like, I can imagine that. I know what that feeling is like because I've been there with my other cars.
Yeah.
But he says, every time I look at that dent, though, I was reminded of my first date with my wife. And that's where it set it up. And so I looked at that. I'm like, at this point, I'm like, I don't think I'm ever going to paint the car. I just love the stories, the history of it. It just says so much more than paint will ever.
Yeah, every dent and ding and rust and hole will have a story. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why a lot of these guys, especially on some of these nicer Concours cars, they're nice, but they're rust buckets. But it's all original. It's been kept the same. Now, I know you've done a little bit to it to make it work right, but not like, obviously you haven't painted it. But you're trying to keep the patina where it's at, right? You're not trying to allow it to go any further.
Correct. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I use ceramic coat now on it, so just to keep it going.
It's so ironic. Like, I remember growing up going, why is that car rusty? Why? And my dad would be like, that's a rat rod. Like, people do that for a reason, or they'll paint a car, or they'll wrap a car to have, like, that weathered look, right? Mm-hmm. While underneath of it, it's a perfectly serviceable car, and it's like, that's just the look they want. And not that it's my favorite thing, but, like, I can totally understand why somebody would be like, this car has had, the original paint, it's been raced, maybe like it's got wear marks from the paint, and then they'll actually clear on top of the rust. They'll make sure the rust isn't continuing. They'll clear on top of it to keep it forever. I'm like, that's just that's a new level of loving your patina for sure.
Absolutely.
So, but that also kind of means like you were finding, solace in your car, this 240, but you also helped somebody else with that car. So like as we go through these stories and talking about how you take cars, you fix them, you either wrap them or whatever you do, you race them. Every single time you've touched a car, maybe except for your RX-7 that I haven't heard of yet. Okay, so even the RX-7 is that you're building these cars, fixing them, doing things, and then using those cars as a vehicle, or, like no pun intended, to helping people, which is so cool.
Yeah, since we brought it up, the RX-7 I bought from who now is a really good friend of mine. And after we met, we just hit it off instantly. We talked about everything. I would ask him about different sorts of questions about the car, what he did, or what, because Mazda was a whole new platform for me, because I've been a Nissan guy and a GM guy all my life. So
okay.
There's a Mazda. Technically my second, I'm sorry. Because I had another RX-7 prior to that, whose was Marty's, by the way. And there's a story behind you. But the RX-7 that I got from my friend Brent, as we started talking, we kept communicating. He ended up going through a whole divorce. And during the whole process of all of that, we would talk and communicate. I would try to support him and say, hey, man, I understand where you're coming from. I would, send positive vibes his way. Hey, I know you got this. I know you're struggling. If you need to open up, and he'd open up to me, just processing and the discussion. And it was just, we built a great bond because of the car, and it's just what I keep finding is that over and over again, the stories of the cars and the connections that it makes for the stories and the reasons why I don't want to get rid of mine, for instance. Right. Take the Infinity. Yes, you know about the Infinity and all that stuff, but I in my notes there, I put a little thing about Circle K. Right. One of the first times I'm driving my car in the evenings, I'm driving back through 70, going to Pickerington, where I live, and a white Escalade passes me, and I saw it had Purple Heart plates because I pay attention to those. I'm like, oh, cool. He's got an Escalade, Purple Heart plates. Good for him. And not good for him, Purple Heart, but good for him. He's got an Escalade.
Right.
I didn't think much more of it. And I drive into the old village of Pickerington, and I stop at the Circle K, and I see the Escalade sitting there. And while I'm getting out of my car, the guy comes up and he says, hey, man, I think I just passed you out on 70. I'm like, yeah, you did. I remember seeing your car. And we started talking. Turns out he's an Army vet, and he's struggling with PTSD, struggling with marriage, life. And I started telling him, well, this is what I do. This is how I deal with things. I told him about the vet center. Yeah. I gave him a brochure because I carry brochures in my trunk. I gave him information. I told him what they've done for me. And he said, okay, cool. And he just took the brochure and walked inside, and he said, thanks. While I'm standing there, another guy kind of walked up behind us and wasn't listening. And then the guy goes, hey, is this your car? And I'm like, yeah. So we started talking a little bit. And as we were talking, found out this is another guy. He's a Navy veteran.
Oh, wow.
He's a physical therapist there in Pickerington. And we're sitting there talking about that. And he's saying how he's struggling because he just lost one of his best friends in the military, committed suicide. And we all know with suicide in the military, we're averaging 20 to 22 veterans committing suicides daily.
Wow. I honestly, I didn't know that.
Yeah, 20 to 22 per day is the average right now.
Holy.
That's why it's written on my car, clear as day, because it's such an important message to bring awareness to. So the second guy came up, the therapist, and as we're talking, the first guy comes back out the door and he says, "Hey, I read this brochure while I was in line. I'm going to call them Monday and get a scheduled appointment for my wife and I. I'm going to try this because we need it. This is what we needed." I'm like, "Fantastic." I go, "Don't forget it's free. Vet Center's free to veterans." And he was like, "Oh, this is fantastic." Well, as I'm sitting there talking, the Navy guy starts talking to the Army guy and he finds out he's Purple Heart and he goes, "Hey, I never served in that capacity, but here's what I can do for you. I'm a physical therapist. If you come to my office, I'll give you free physical therapy once a week."
Oh, wow. Holy crap.
Just to help him out. And I'm listening to the story. I'm talking and I go back home and talking to my wife and I'm saying, "Hey, this is what happened to me. You won't believe this. My car, just because my car is wrapped and
Right.
I'm meeting people like this and connecting them. And I can't tell you how many years my wife would say, "You and your stupid car," because of all the time with it or the things I would do with it. And she says it too. She goes, "You and your stupid car," but this time it was a different tone
Right.
because she understood at that point what I was doing with it. I was using it to not only better myself in some way, but at the same time, it was really its goal was to help someone. Didn't
Right.
matter who, didn't matter the number. If I helped one person in my life with
Right.
what I'm doing, it makes everything worth it. And because of that car, and the reason why I carry brochures or pamphlets in the car all the time, because it doesn't matter now. I might be at a gas station filling up, and some lady might start asking me about PTSD, and her husband's struggling or she's struggling. I no longer just focus on military. I focus on first responders too. I talk to them.
Yeah.
Families too, because there's secondary trauma. I've seen it. I've created some of it in my ugly past with kids.
Okay.
So this whole love and passion of cars has opened up so many doors for me. And now that I've turned around and I started using that focus of expressing or, using it to serve others, it's changed its meaning for me. It's made it a deeper passion, I guess, than what I had before, which is more of a surface level at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up a huge point, which is like these shared passions are a great way to open people up. It's crazy what people will talk to you about when they go, "Oh man, I love your car. I had a car just like that." And then it's like a switch flips that all of a sudden now they're talking about difficulties with their marriages, difficulties with, survivor guilt, all these other things that may be plaguing them just because of not only a rap, but a similar interest, right? And then you can reach out to them and touch them a little bit differently when you have that shared experience or that shared commonality. Right, I think that's huge. Hey guys, Matt from the Midwest Motoring Podcast. Thanks so much for listening to this episode. We were joined by Jeremy Clark. We realized after recording that there was just so much more to talk about, and so we wanted to break it up into two parts. That way, everyone could digest what he said as well as think about it. And then, so we'll release this one on Tuesday, and then the next one on Thursday. So if you are interested, go to Save a Warrior Foundation, and we'll post all the links in our Facebook group as well as Vet Motorsport. Again, thank you to Jeremy Clark, and come back for the next installment of the Midwest Motoring Podcast where we finish up our conversation with Jeremy Clark. Thanks, guys. We'll see you real soon.